Maybe you're just dealing with some inconsistencies. Hello, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara. Maybe you're sending well wishes to your fallen comrades, Bucky Irving, now Omarion Hampton. Maybe you're attacking the waiver wire and you're getting the big middle finger from the guys that you're trying to start. Yes, Emari DeMarcado, you and your fumble at the goal line. And Woody Marks in Houston, what are you doing? Unless you drafted perfectly at the running back position, you, along with a million other people right now playing fantasy football, are having trouble setting your running backs. Well, today we're diving into all of the matchups and which running backs we can feel comfortable with in week 6. And I've got a brand new segment that I'm going to be kicking off our running back start and sit shows with the rest of the season. And it's our BRUNT Workhorse Report. And just like BRUNT offers high performance workwear for any job, these guys are high performance players with heavy duty durability that hopefully will stay on the field even with all of this volume. There might be a couple of injuries here or there, that's just the way football goes. But we know on a weekly basis if any of these guys find our lineups, they're going to be getting a decent amount of touches. It's kind of crazy that Christian McCaffrey is at the very top by 21 touches over Jonathan Taylor, who's absolutely having a fantastic season himself. But what about a guy like Bucky Irving? He missed last week with an injury, and he's still inside the top 10 of total touches this season. Alvin Kamara, I mentioned him. He's absolutely been inconsistent, but he's in the top 12 of touches right now. And Quinshon Judkins at number 19, we didn't even know when this guy was going to step on the field or if he was going to step on the field at the beginning of the year. And now he's quickly becoming one of the better running backs for fantasy football for those of you that decided to use a late round pick on him and risk it even though there was a potential suspension. The last couple of weeks, he's looked fantastic and he's already inside the top 20. And if you're missing those workhorses from your fantasy lineup, do not be missing the workhorse that BRUNT is for all of your daily jobs. No matter what you do, it's always good to have some high performance workwear on hand that is good for any job, offers all day comfort, and is heavy duty durability. And guess what? You can try it risk-free on the job site. Just head on over to brunt.com or use the link in the description down below and use code HEADLINERS at checkout for $10 off of your order. Thursday Night Football, let's go ahead and talk about the matchup of Philadelphia and the New York Giants. Saquon Barkley headed back to the Meadowlands. We've already seen him play there, but you know he's going to want to put on a pretty decent show. And for Saquon Barkley going up against the New York Giants, they're allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game, the 8th most rushing yards, and they've allowed 5 rushing touchdowns to running backs so far this season. Now, last week, Saquon Barkley was not good. 6 for 30 on the ground. He did give us a 47-yard touchdown reception, however, but this week against the New York Giants, even though his ceiling continues to be limited, this is one of those matchups where I think he can reach it. Now, we obviously want to note real quick that Saquon Barkley is dealing with a knee injury, and as of this recording, he had not practiced on Monday. On Tuesday, this video typically comes out between like 1 and 2, so he may have ended up practicing on Tuesday. He may not. It's something we'll monitor throughout the week. If for some reason he doesn't play, then we're going to switch our attention over to either Will Shipley or A.J. Dillon. Tank Bigsby looks like he's kind of confined to the special teams game at this point, and those would be the two guys that would get touches at the running back spot. I would encourage us to keep an eye on Tyrone Tracy Jr. He is back at practice this week, and with it being a short week in Thursday Night Football, I doubt he's activated and plays right away. I would expect him to miss another week, but with the way Cam Scatabo has performed so far, I'm not entirely sure that Tyrone Tracy isn't going to come back and at least take half of the work right away. For this week, if it's only Cam Scatabo, he's going to be a fringe start. And again, I truly believe that Tyrone Tracy's not going to play this week. Philadelphia is allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game, the 10th most rushing yards, the 7th most receiving yards, and they've allowed 5 total touchdowns to running backs so far. So Philadelphia on the ground hasn't been nearly intimidating this year as they have been in the past. Now back to Scatabo for a second, because so far we haven't seen a ton of upside. The last couple of weeks with no Tyrone Tracy, RB23, and RB20. And he's only averaging 3.5 yards per carry, and he had a fumble last week. So while you might be able to enjoy Scatterboo by himself this week, it might not be too long before Tyrone Tracy comes back and we're at 50-50 again. We got ourselves another early morning matchup on Sunday over in England with the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets. And for Denver, J.K. Dobbins continues to be a workhorse, which is not something that you could say about him early in his career. So it's been great that he's been healthy so far this season, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed that that sticks. And this week against the New York Jets, who currently allow the 7th most rushing yards, but the 2nd fewest receiving yards to opposing running backs, this is a J.K. Dobbins day and not an R.J. Harvey day. R.J. Harvey saw a little bit of an uptick in the passing game a couple weeks ago, kind of disappeared last week. This week, it's going to be J.K. Dobbins, and he's had some tougher matchups. Going up against Philadelphia, which was supposed to be a tougher matchup, he ran for 79 yards on 20 carries with a touchdown. But unfortunately, no R.J. Harvey in this one. I know we tried it last week potentially with the work that he saw in the passing game, but with as good as the Jets have been against running backs in the passing game, that's not going to be a focus for us this week. This week for Breece Hall against the Denver Broncos, the name of the game is going to be what he does as a pass catcher. Because right now the Denver Broncos have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown on the season. So on the ground, running backs are not seeing a very high ceiling. However, the Denver Broncos have allowed 231 receiving yards to opposing running backs. That's the 5th most in football. And over the last 3 weeks, Breece Hall has seen 6, 6, and 5 targets. So his looks in the passing game have ticked up a little bit. For me this week with Breece Hall, he's going to be a start because that's what he could do in the passing game alone. And anything he adds on the ground, would just be a little extra topping on top of the Sunday. For the Arizona and Indianapolis matchup, we have one mess that we need to discuss, and then we have Jonathan Taylor, who you're putting in your lineup no matter what. But for the Arizona backfield, I think mess is basically the best word that you can come up with. Here's the bright side to this backfield. And if you're a member here on YouTube and you are in our exclusive Discord channel, then you got the breaking news update from me right away. When Trey Benson went on the IR, I tagged everybody in Discord and I said, hey, people are going to go crazy over Emari Demercado. He's going to be the #1 guy added at this point. If we want to pivot, or if Demercado's already been taken, pick up Michael Carter. Because I anticipate Michael Carter being the lead back to start, with Demercado getting some work in the passing game and being the next guy up if Carter just can't get the job done. Well, I was kind of shocked to see the splits, even before Demercado made that stupid bonehead play. Michael Carter was the clear lead back. He had 18 carries for 51 yards and a touchdown, and he added 5 receptions on 5 targets for 22 yards. Demercado didn't even receive a target last game, and I doubt he's going to see any more work than what he just did after that fumble that should have been a huge touchdown. This is not a matchup that I'm anticipating putting either of these guys in my lineup because it's a tough one. Indianapolis right now is allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, and they've only allowed 3 total touchdowns to opposing running backs this season. So for me this week, I'm going to sit Demercado and Carter unless you're in that big of a bind. Jonathan Taylor has been fantastic to begin the season. He has 2 RB1 performances and 1 RB2 performance. He has 6 touchdowns on the season. And yes, those 6 touchdowns have only come in 2 different games, but he is one of only 2 running backs to have over 100 fantasy points so far this year. It doesn't matter what the matchup is, Jonathan Taylor's a start. Last week, we spent time debating Demercado or Michael Carter. This week, we get to start debating Hassan Haskins versus Kamani Vidal. And that's just where we're at with fantasy football in 2025. The LA Chargers versus the Miami Dolphins. Omarion Hampton, who seemed like he was well on his way to a breakout campaign, will now be missing for at least the next 4 weeks with an ankle injury. So now it's time to debate. Najee Harris is gone, Hampton is gone, Haskins or Vidal. Now, I need to try and channel my inner running back whisperer once again, like I did last week when I made the Michael Carter call. And that call was way better than the and then the Tank Bigsby call to begin the year. So one good one, one bad one. Let's make another good one here. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the main guy is Hassan Haskins. Now, last week when we take a look at the numbers, they don't really show us a whole lot. Vidal had 4 carries for 18 yards, only 1 target, he caught it for 1 yard. Haskins, he had 5 carries for 13 yards, also had 1 target, he also caught that, but for 2 yards. And this is a really solid matchup. Miami is currently allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and the most rushing yards. But last week, almost all of the work for Haskins came after Omarion Hampton was done for the day. That's when you saw his snap count tick up. He ended up having the same amount of snaps as Vidal, but almost all of his snaps came after Omarion Hampton went down with his injury. What does that tell us? That Haskins is going to fill that early down role. That Vidal has a role, 3rd down, pass catching, things of that nature. Haskins is going to be the guy that is going to replace a majority of what Omarion Hampton does as the early down back. And also keep in mind, Hassan Haskins was the running back for Jim Harbaugh just a few years ago at Michigan. Devon Achane, he could be in for a tougher matchup this week. Last week already wasn't that great. He only ran for 16 yards on 10 carries, but in the passing game, he was solid once again, caught 6 of his 7 targets for 30 yards and a touchdown. But this week against the Chargers, they're allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game, but the biggest takeaway here, they have not allowed a receiving touchdown to a running back as of yet. The work that Devon Achane gets in the passing game keeps him with a solid RB2 floor, but he's going to have to do more on the ground if he wants to give us those top 12 weeks. I have no idea what's going on with the New England backfield, and I don't think New England's coaching staff even knows themselves. And this is coming from an avid Ramondre Stevenson supporter. I have been a truther since he was drafted, and I still felt like this year he was going to make some sort of an impact and not just give up his job to Travion Henderson. But even I'm a little bit baffled at this point how Henderson is not getting more touches. And now we've got Antonio Gibson probably done for the season at this point. How is Stevenson staying on the field? He lost another fumble, and he only had 14 yards on 7 carries. But you know what he did do? He scored 2 touchdowns. Henderson had 24 yards on 6 carries, and he caught 2 of 3 targets for a whole whopping 3 yards. And personally, I want to stay away from both of them right now. Because is it going to be Ramondre Stevenson? Is it not? Is it going to end up being Travion Henderson? What does it look like now with no Antonio Gibson? Do they throw the ball an awful lot? Do they lead New Orleans? And do they lean on the running game? I don't know. There's just a whole lot of question marks at this point. You might be in a position where you have to start one of these guys. And if you do, I feel for you. I truly do. But me personally, I'd rather them both be on the bench this week, as long as I had guys that I felt like I could count on with a little bit more of a safer floor. The New Orleans backfield, though, definitely garners more attention at this point. And I mentioned Alvin Kamara back at the beginning of the show. He was on our Workhorse report. He is a guy that's still 12th in terms of total touches among running backs right now. But Kendre Miller is sneaking up behind him because his snap share has grown substantially by like 40%. Over the last 2 weeks. This past week, Miller had 10 carries for 41 yards. He caught 1 target for 8 yards. Alvin Kamara, he had 8 carries for 27 yards, and he caught 4 of his 6 targets for only 28 yards. I mean, Kamara, the only reason that he's a fringe start in this game is because of his work in the passing game. Because New England right now allows the 5th fewest fantasy points per game, the 5th fewest rushing yards, and they've only allowed 3 touchdowns to running backs this year. Miller on the ground is not a great bet this week, but I can guarantee you over the next couple of weeks after this game, in better matchups, we need to talk about Kendre Miller a little bit more in depth. I said it last week, and I'll say it again this week. Quinshon Judkins has become a must start at this point. He's getting the volume. He's playing well against tougher opponents. They're leaning on running the football with him. 23 carries for 110 yards last week. He's doing exactly what a workhorse running back should do. And he has a solid RB2 floor right now. And if he could add some touchdowns, you could be looking at a guy that could jump into the top 12 on a weekly basis as well. And Jake and I agreed on this one. We felt like Judkins was a breakout candidate this season, and we had him in the draft guide as one as well. Unfortunately, we had to cool on him after all of the legal troubles. It looks like he's going to play this entire year unencumbered, and maybe he has to deal with a suspension over the offseason and going into next year. But for now, Quinshon Judkins, after missing game 1 of the year and hopefully keeping himself out of any legal trouble going forward, he is a guy that needs to be in our lineup consistently. I would like to go with Jaylen Warren, but as of this recording, I don't know if I'm entirely on board with what I'm hearing about him with his injury reports right now. Now, he is participating in individual drills, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in the closed portions of practice, he's out there in team time or that he's being utilized like he's a guy that is going to play this week. So we may need to revisit Jaylen Warren in the nuclear video later on, and you definitely are going to want to check out the rankings. But this Cleveland matchup is not great, regardless if he plays or not. And if he does play, it's going to be all about what he can do in the passing game, not what he can do on the ground. Right now, Cleveland is allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game, the third fewest rushing yards to running backs, and then they have not allowed a receiving touchdown all season either at this point to running backs. So this matchup for Kenneth Gainwell and Jaylen Warren just doesn't look great. And with Jaylen Warren being a last-minute scratch a couple of weeks ago, throwing everybody off their game on Sunday morning, I don't know if we trust it with him quite yet this week. For Dallas and Carolina, Javonte Williams, one of the best late-round picks that anybody could have made this season. He is performing amazingly, and he looks like his old self, which is great to see. He's been a top 5 running back 3 times this season. He's been a top 24 running back once. He's averaging 5.7 yards per attempt, and he's also averaging some pretty decent passing game work as well. Javonte Williams is another one of those workhorse running backs that will find his way into our lineup every week right now. For those of you that had to pick up Rico Dowdle last week to replace Chuba Hubbard, you got an insane performance. I don't really know if we should be expecting anything close to that once again, but he could still be in for a decent start this week. The problem is on paper, yeah, you look at Dallas and they allow the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. But the main reason for that is the 299 receiving yards they've allowed to running backs so far, the most in football. Chuba Hubbard is going to be out for a couple of weeks, and Rico Dowdle had an insane day, so a lot of people are probably just going to automatically put him in their lineup, and you might not have a choice. But the numbers don't make this matchup look nearly as easy because a lot of the fantasy points that Dallas is giving up to running backs, they're giving up to guys in the passing game. Now, Dowdle did have 4 targets last week, which is solid, and if he keeps that up, he could definitely make an impact if he catches all 4 of those targets. I think the main thing to take away from this, it could be revenge day. Rico Dowdle is going to be going up against his former team, the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm sure he would like to show them, y'all made a mistake in letting me walk. Even though I don't think they did because Javonte Williams has been really good this year. But I bet Dowdle is going to be looking to have a huge day. He's still going to be a fringe start for me. I don't think he's going to give us the performance that he did last week, but I still think he could be very solid this week. I think he's going to be more of a low end to mid RB2 though. I really don't know what to tell you about the Seattle backfield, and that's been like the main issue with people so far this season because we talked up Kenneth Walker a lot. I had him in my must-have running backs videos. I was all over Kenneth Walker when it came to drafting him and then handcuffing him with Zach Charbonnet this season. But I don't really know what the issue is at this point because when you take a look at the numbers, Kenneth Walker is a better running back. Zach Charbonnet has not even been close to as efficient as Kenneth Walker has been. And all the underlying stats show that. When you take a look at what Kenneth Walker has done, even from a volume standpoint, he's still the RB17 this season, averaging 12.1 fantasy points per game. For where you drafted him, that's about par for the course. When you take a look at Zach Charbonnet, he's the RB40. Now that's because he missed a game, but he's only averaging 8.6 fantasy points per game. So he's averaging less than Kenneth Walker. And based on the coach speak from this offseason, the way they talked about Kenneth Walker was insane. Like he was going to be the next great NFL running back and they were going to be utilizing him like that. And this offense was going to run through him. I mean, you can find tons of interviews where the entire Seattle coaching staff was like, Kenneth Walker is the guy. And I don't know, maybe it's the stupid penalty a couple of weeks ago. Maybe that's still sticking with them. I don't know what it is, but they keep getting the ball to Zach Charbonnet when they should be getting it to Kenneth Walker. And that's killing his upside right now. For Zach Charbonnet, he's got more than 10 fantasy points in each of the last couple of games. For Kenneth Walker, he doesn't have a very high ceiling, but he's been really, really efficient, which is helping him still keep a decent floor. I think for right now, probably both of these guys are fringe starts. Travis Etienne against the Seattle Seahawks this week is going to need to get involved in the passing game. Right now, Seattle's defense is allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. However, they are allowing the 6th fewest rushing yards to running backs, and they've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns so far this season. It's the passing work, 2nd most receiving yards, and the most receptions allowed to running backs so far this year. Etienne had 4 targets last week. Tootin only had 1. I know a lot of people are still waiting for Tootin to become a thing, but as of right now, it doesn't really seem like it. Travis Etienne will continue to be the guy, and hopefully it's the passing game that helps him out this week. The LA Rams and Kyren Williams will be getting a shot at a very depleted Baltimore defense, and they looked terrible last week, and unfortunately, it could end up happening again this week. Right now, Baltimore's defense allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, the 4th most rushing yards, and they're tied for the 3rd most rushing touchdowns allowed as well. And for Kyren Williams, I feel like I keep hearing people talk about like they don't love the season he's putting together so far, but he's been a top 10 running back 2 of the last 3 weeks. And even though he doesn't have a rushing touchdown since week 1, he's still finding his way into the end zone through the passing game. So the numbers continue to be there. This is painful, and this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to absolutely sit Derrick Henry, but he's a fringe start right now because personally, with the way this offense is playing and with the way they have injuries on offense and on defense, Derrick Henry is a guy that's looking at top 24 potential at best right now. He doesn't have top 5 potential. And I think it's fair to be frustrated with that, but I also think it's fair to say, hey, Derrick Henry is a guy that we kind of have to keep playing. Now, you don't love this matchup against the LA Rams. 2nd fewest fantasy points per game, 9th fewest rushing yards, and they haven't allowed a rushing touchdown yet to an opponent this season. I get it. I understand why Derrick Henry is frustrating to own right now. And as a guy that loves Derrick Henry, and I don't quite think his career is going down yet, I think it's more about the offense around him and not him himself. Do you have better options? Realistically, do you have better options that you look at and say, yeah, I can start them over Derrick Henry? If you do, then absolutely go for it. But if you don't, you really don't have a choice. It's Derrick Henry or bust. We could definitely see a couple of very solid running back performances this week in the Tennessee and Las Vegas matchup. For Tony Pollard, maybe he doesn't have the biggest upside in the world. And I know a lot of people are worried about Tajay Spears, even though last week he looked like a guy that's going to be working his way back from injury. I don't think he's going to ramp up all the way in the next couple of weeks, but maybe in the next few weeks we'll see it happen. But for Tony Pollard this week, Las Vegas has allowed the 2nd most rushing touchdowns so far this season. But here's the thing, a majority of them are coming from close to the goal line because they're not allowing a ton of rushing yards. They're allowing guys to score. And that's where Tony Pollard is going to make his mark this week. This week, I still like Tony Pollard as an RB2. He scored last week. And yeah, Tajay Spears is going to see some more snaps this week, working his way back from injury. Tony Pollard is probably going to see a few less snaps as well. But based on the performance last week, I don't think Tony Pollard is going to disappear as the main running back anytime soon. I think Ashton Genty has a legitimate shot as a top 5 running back this week, and could potentially challenge for the number 1 overall spot. Right now, Tennessee allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game, the 2nd most rushing yards per game, and they have allowed 8 rushing touchdowns as well. The RB1 and the RB16 over the last 2 weeks. He's finally collecting yards. He's finally collecting volume, and he's scoring touchdowns as well. And with as bad as Geno Smith has been and as good as this matchup is on the ground, we could see a ton of Ashton Jeanty this week. For Cincinnati and Green Bay, I'm going to sit Chase Brown this week. Again, you could be in a situation where you can't, and you have to play Chase Brown. And if you do, I completely understand it. But going up against Green Bay, who's allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, things don't look good for Chase Brown this week. And they haven't looked good for Chase Brown against lesser opponents. I mean, even last week, Detroit's defense has been solid against running backs this year. But last week, Jake Browning had more rush yards than what Chase Brown did. Samaje Perine had more rush yards on 4 less carries than Chase Brown. Now, Chase Brown saw 8 targets, and potentially you could still look at him as a flex option in a half PPR and a full PPR league. I'd much rather it be a full PPR league. Half PPR, standard, personally for me, if I have somebody that I feel like could give me a bigger upside this week, I'm going to go with them over Chase Brown. Josh Jacobs has a great matchup coming out of the bye, so I really anticipate him taking full advantage of it. Cincinnati allowing the most fantasy points per game to running backs and the 3rd most rushing yards. He was the RB2 against Dallas right before the break. He's got 4 touchdowns in 4 games this season, and he's had at least 1 touchdown in all of them but 1. Josh Jacobs is in for a really solid week. There's not much to say when it comes to Christian McCaffrey. He's on pace for the greatest receiving season ever by a running back. And that's basically because he's going to be breaking a lot of his own records anyway. So much volume in the passing game that what he does on the ground right now is irrelevant. Was it the best day for Rachaad White? No, it wasn't, but we know this about Rachaad White. He's not a very efficient running back. Last week, 14 carries, 41 yards, 2 touchdowns though. And the passing game caught all 4 of his targets for 30 yards. The 2 rushing touchdowns is great. And that's what we're going to keep hoping for because he's going to get the volume. He's going to get the touchdown opportunity. And even if he doesn't have the efficiency right now, he's still a lot better option to continue to play with Bucky Irving being out than a lot of other guys. For the Detroit Lions, a tough week 1 in Green Bay had everybody questioning Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, the entire offensive game plan. They've been very solid since then. Since that week 1 performance, Gibbs has been the RB4, David Montgomery has been the RB8. And how do you beat Patrick Mahomes? You keep the ball away from him. Or if you're Trevor Lawrence, you fall down a couple of times and then jump in the end zone. But we're not making fun of Trevor Lawrence here. That's a different video that we can do that. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs have very solid floors, and with how banged up their secondary is in Detroit right now, I expect them to really want to lean on the run game and just keep the ball away from Mahomes as much as possible. Detroit's run defense for the most part this season has been solid, and there's going to be some games where they give up a rushing touchdown or they give up some bigger running plays, but a majority of the time they are wrapping up running backs and they're making life difficult. Right now, they're allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points and 8th fewest rushing yards to running backs. Last week, Kareem Hunt was overall solid. He had 7 carries, 49 rushing yards. The 2 touchdowns is the biggest thing. But when it comes to the yards, 33 of those were on only 1 carry. So when you look at it, overall, he wasn't very efficient. For Isaiah Pacheco, he was a little bit more efficient, 36 yards on 7 carries. But this is a split backfield. Both of them had 7 carries, and they both spent an equal amount of time on the field. Isaiah Pacheco just doesn't have that pop that he used to. And right now it seems like they're more inclined to go with Kareem Hunt when they get closer to the goal line. Buffalo, Atlanta, and Atlanta right now allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So this is a tough one for James Cook, and he has a lower ceiling this week than what he has had for the majority of this season. Last week was the first time that he finished outside the top 10 this year. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed that he does get back on track. It is not the easiest matchup to do it, and I could see him definitely being more of a low-end RB1, maybe a high-end RB2, than the top 10 potential he's had this season, but we're still going to be playing him. Even though James Cook may not be in for a huge ceiling this week, Bijan Robinson is. Right now, Buffalo is allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game, because they're allowing the 3rd most rushing touchdowns right now. For Bijan Robinson, he has been a top 7 running back in 3 of his 4 games, and he's been over 100 total yards in every game this season. fire them up. And this one will be a fun one to watch, given the fact that Chicago got their hearts ripped out by Jaden Daniels last year on a last-second Hail Mary. Could you just imagine the internet if it happened again? I would love to see that. DeAndre Swift, he's only going to be a fringe start for me. He hasn't been higher than RB18 at any point this season. He has 2 games outside of the top 24 running backs when realistically you couldn't have even used him in either of those weeks. And he's touchdown dependent for a ceiling that is extremely low to begin with. JCM, though, after a big week last week, could also have a very solid week once again. The Chicago Bears allow the 4th most fantasy points per game, the 5th most rushing yards, and that's even with the bye. Yeah, even with the bye, they're allowing the 5th most rushing yards to running backs right now. JCM last week, 111 yards on only 14 carries, and they scored twice. He added 2 catches on 2 targets for 39 yards in the passing game, and hopefully this was not a trick. I cannot deal with the tricks for backfields in the NFL anymore. If JCM is the guy, let's roll with JCM. I swear to God, if Chris Rodriguez comes out and gets 10 carries this week, I am slamming my head in a door repeatedly. But Headliner Nation, for my sanity and all of your sanity as well, I hope JCM is just the guy. One less backfield to try and figure out would make us all a lot happier. But hopefully this start and sit analysis for every matchup at the running back position is helping you figure out your lineup a little bit already. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on the bell notifications, because I do these same videos for quarterbacks, tight ends, and wide receivers as well. And when those drop, the notification will go off and you'll know it's time to hop into the video. Headliner Nation, hopefully you all stay safe and stay healthy out there. Leave a comment down below if you can, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.